Hi everyone. The today presentation is the topic is the overlooked role of veganism in Marxism and on the left by Emilia Leese. She's an author of Think Like a Vegan and a well-known rewilder and public speaker. Seeking to challenge, educate, and illuminate, Think Like a Vegan draws threads between essential points of philosophical thought to help answer the fundamental ethical question: how should we act and why? Welcome, Liz, Emilia, Liz.
Thank you so much, Ala. It's really great to be back. Um, Last time I was here, it was 2023 when the hardcover of Think Like a Vegan was released in North America. And this time, I really appreciate you asking me back on the sort of, well, I guess on the event of the paperback of Think Like a Vegan being released in North America earlier this month, earlier in April. And so I'm delighted to be back because the first time around it was a really exciting conversation. And I have no doubt that it will also be exciting this time. Um, I'm just going to say a couple words about me. I'm going to say a couple of words about the book as well. Although my talk it's not drawn from Think Like a Vegan, but from a different line of work that I have been working on and thinking about in the last period of time. Um, so just a bit about my background. I was a corporate finance lawyer for many years in London and in New York. For about 20 years or over 20 years. And now I focus on a variety of things. One of the things that I focus on is writing. My most current writing, in addition to Think Like a Vegan, is an article in Current Affairs talking about farming animals. Um, and the rewilding project that Ala very kindly referred to, we can talk about that later. It's called Birchfield, and that's in the Highlands in Scotland, and where I live part of the time, and the part of the time I'm also in London, where I am right now. So what I want to talk about today, or just give really an overview of the fundamental ideas, um, is is the overlooked role of veganism and squaring it with Marxism. And that's often uh, uh, it's an unusual situation, but not because of the theory, but just because of how veganism is often perceived, and you'll see that as I go through my paper. Um, this paper that I'll be talking with you about is a version of a paper I delivered at the Marx in the Anthropocene conference in Venice back in March of this year, and that is and it's a much shorter version of a much larger and longer paper and more involved paper that I have developed over this last period of time. And I'll share my screen. Hopefully it will let me do that. And, hmm, strangely, hold on a second. Oh, well, share. Yes. Okay. Oh, sorry, one second. It needs to go into system settings and let me do that. So one second, I will do that. Apologies. I thought that was all set, but it doesn't seem that it is, but now it is. Okay, fine. Sorry about that. So this is a new setting that Zoom has. Oh, um, can I just leave the meeting and come right back? Because that's the only way that I'm going to be able to share my screen. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Sure, go.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
The problem, everybody, is this is that the Zoom people keep changing the way you do stuff, every time you do it. So Amelia should be back in just a moment.
Yes,
Yeah,
and hopefully here I am. Sorry about that.
yeah,
Um, it's the new settings that they have don't make things easy.
yeah.
But here we are. Okay, so trying again. Take two. And here we are. Share that. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
I
Great.
can see it.
Oh, fantastic. I'm delighted to hear that. Okay, so as I said, the presentation itself is not going to be terribly long, probably about 23 minutes or so. And then we can talk about whatever we want to talk about. So one of the great disappointments for many leftist vegans is encountering hostilities from other leftists about veganism. Discussions of anti-oppression and solidarity turn into their antithesis as soon as veganism is mentioned. Express solidarity with oppressed people, you get a heartening discussion. Express
Mhm.
solidarity with oppressed animals, your interlocutor turns into a reactionary or a sausage socialist. That's an endearing term I learned from Troy Vittese. Our comrades are people who understand the causes and effects of exploitation by the capitalist machine. They understand the injustice of it. And just as we have, we expect they would extend their understanding to the 83 billion land animals slaughtered each year. At a minimum, we expect that they too would be keen to discuss the role animal agriculture plays in the Anthropocene. In practice, the responses, dismissals, and resistance are no different than those from any other non-vegan. It's just our disappointment with the left, which smarts more, understandably. Veganism is a critical, yet overlooked component of leftist critiques of capitalism's exploitation of both human and animal life. Veganism has a place at the table of Marxist theory, which can, and in my view, obviously, should be expanded to include its practice. So on this slide, we've got the definition of veganism, and it comes from the Vegan Society. The Vegan Society's definition of veganism is a comprehensive working definition, despite the variety of applications one comes across. And you may have heard this from health vegan or environment vegan and other variants. The variations reflect popular misunderstandings or incomplete understanding of the term and practice, sharing the structural similarities with post-feminism's depoliticization of feminism as a collective mode of politics, as Eva Haifa Giroud notes. Often, the discussion around veganism solely focuses on food, and there are a variety of reasons for that, including consumerism. But more importantly, the principal manner in which humans manifest our relationship to other animals is through the food we consume. But veganism as a philosophy, writes Giroud, encompasses any relationship with animals where they're used for the primary benefit of humans. And the benefits of the philosophy and practice have always been holistic for animals, humans, and the environment. Although the definition includes an ostensibly consumerist angle, its intent isn't consumerist qua consumerism. It's not an exhortation to capital accumulation, but a call to productive labor benefiting not only animals, but humans and the environment. In 1951, Leslie Cross, he was one of the founders of the Vegan Society, was clear when he wrote, "Veganism is a liberatory movement for both animals and humans," and that it aims to abolish exploitation and restores humanity's relationship with nature, which also echoes Marx's metabolic rift, which we'll discuss a bit later. While Cross's analogies and views can reflect his time, the core message, liberation and reimagining equitable relationships, remains vital, emphasizing true progress lies in ending domination and fostering equality. I believe the practice of veganism is inextricable from other praxes of social justice, and it's one component in dismantling oppression of creating a new society. Conversely, it's inchoate to eschew animal use and then ignore or participate in human oppression and exploitation. Now, as the title of this talk was The Overlooked Role, there's a marginalization of veganism in leftist political discourse. And it's not so much that there's an absence of veganism and concern for animals in leftist political discourse, but a dismissal or marginalization of the practice, despite quite a significant amount of scholarship. Whether the perception is the practice is moralistic and bourgeois, or it's a lifestyle rather than a systemic critique, or there's no room in Marxism for anyone but humans, these concepts serve as easy ways for leftists to simply not engage with the challenges posed by our use of animals. And here I am a bit assuming certain things that I discussed in my previous talk, but if we need to go over them at some point, I'm happy to do that. And the points being other basic principles of veganism and certain factual matters. Veganism is generalized as moralistic or simply a consumerist lifestyle. I argue veganism is a political building block, whether in challenging capitalist norms or in imagining new relationships with nature, animals, and people. Veganism gets dismissed through stereotypes, some of which you can see here on the screen, such as vegans being ostentatious, overly meticulous, or narrow-minded. But these critiques fail to address the validity of the practice and are often used to silence discourse. Like other non-normative political beliefs, like socialism or feminism even, veganism disrupts societal norms, challenging entrenched systems of oppression, which can provoke discomfort. And what's wrong with a bit of discomfort? Discomfort is necessary for progress, as questioning relationships and norms is essential to advancing alternatives to the status quo. While vegans, like any group, exhibit diverse behaviors, I mean, we're people, their consistency in rejecting animal exploitation mirrors the principled stances of socialists or feminists or anyone else, however annoying we might be to others. Critiques of veganism often stem from a lack of understanding and a reluctance to engage with its ethical and systemic implications. To foster productive dialogue, it's crucial to contextualize veganism within historical, geographical, and institutional frameworks, moving beyond the superficial judgments to address the deeper issues it raises. While veganism has been commodified, like all movements under capitalism, this doesn't diminish its political significance. And an important note with respect to foods, because I think it's important to state this, many plant-based foods, such as soy milk or seitan, tempeh, and tofu, some of which you might be familiar with and some of which you might not, these have long been staples in Asian diets, predating the recent surge in the, quote, plant-based market by a few thousand years. So the real issue is capitalism commodifies everything, obscuring deeper political and philosophical meanings. And we see this with Leslie Cross's words that I just talked about a little bit before. And these tend to be relegated to obscurity or to relative obscurity because veganism's foundation in liberation and equality is an inconvenient concept to capitalism. As Marco Maurizi argues, liberalism's atomistic worldview limits discussion of animal liberation within the confines of existing societal structures. While veganism alone cannot dismantle inequality or redefine societal organization, it fundamentally challenges the notion that human flourishing requires animal exploitation. More than just a dietary choice, it serves as a radical praxis that questions dominant power structures and enables individuals to disengage from one of capitalism's most exploitative industries, offering a concrete step towards envisioning a more just world. But regardless of critiques, there's no justification for dismissing the rejection of animal products today. Whether as a systemic critique, a rejection of capitalism's exploitation of animals, or a collective boycott, veganism belongs in leftist discourse. While it extends beyond diet, food remains the primary way humans interact with animals, making daily dietary choices both personal and political. As a form of boycott, veganism aligns with historic leftist social justice struggles, serving as both a material and a symbolic act against oppressive economic and political systems. Without both critique and praxis, veganism can be hollow, but that doesn't make its fundamental value hollow. It fosters solidarity with the oppressed, challenges all forms of supremacy, and provides a radical shift in worldview that can be a catalyst for broader political transformation. So let's talk a little bit about how this squares with Marxism. One of the critiques is Marxism is inherently anthropocentric. Well, is it? The claim Marxism is inherently anthropocentric is based on, among other things, Marx and Engels' skepticism towards early animal welfare movements. And that's a rigid interpretation, ignoring the evolution of Marxist thought. While Marx focused on human liberation, his framework allows for expansion, and as our understanding of non-human animals has grown, many scholars have integrated animal concerns into Marxist critique. Marx and his views about animals were also products of that time. It's actually, in my view, immaterial whether Marx was simply wrong about animals, as a quote, as Ted Benton writes. Since Marx, knowledge about animal sentience and environmental science has expanded. And here we have an example with the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness that you see before you. It's illustrative as to how a large group of scientists and philosophers and ethologists and so forth, what they've agreed to with respect to animal consciousness and sentience. Marxist scholars today have reinterpreted and extended Marx's theories to include animals in discussions of exploitation and alienation. In fact, some argue Marxist critiques of oppressive structures can and should address animal suffering. This leads John Sanbonmatsu to ask whether it's even possible to be a socialist without being an animal liberationist. Anna L. Peterson argues that while Marx's original work may not have included animal liberation, contemporary Marxism must address it because both socialism and animal liberation challenge capitalist structures. Christian Stosch examines whether animals under capitalism should be categorized as exploited workers, slaves, or commodities. He concludes none of those, but that there is a despotic relationship of super exploitation, integrating animals and nature into capitalism, and showing how both workers and animals are exploited in one capitalist continuum. And while Gary Francione's critique of animals as property may not fully address broader social structures, the reality that all animals, whether they're farmed, domesticated, or wild, are legally owned, whether by individuals or corporates or states, it's a fact that many people overlook. And recognizing this can spark deeper conversations about exploitation and systemic oppression, with veganism serving as a practical tool to challenge dominant power structures. And finally, Maurizi argues Marxist theory can accommodate animal liberation by breaking the cycle of domination and recognizing the simple materialist notion that humans are animals. Which brings us to the environmental context, which is also critical here. And here is a very short overview of how animal agriculture is a driver of environmental degradation. This context, or our context that we're living now, is much different from that in which Marx and Engels lived. And our existential crisis has to push all of us, and especially the left, to have much broader conversations. One such must be to radically address our collective consumption of animal products and the catastrophic impact of this practice. But perhaps different isn't the right word, because Marx foresaw capitalism would have negative effects on the earth as well as humans. In Capital, he writes, capitalist production thus advances the technological means of social production processes and combines those processes more and more only by damaging the very fount of all wealth, the earth and the worker. The extent and gravity of the damage and its consequences, which we now face, is hard enough for us to fully grasp, and we have the benefit and help of scientific knowledge. It's unthinkable that Marx, were he here, would react passively or dismissively to our current situation. Without tackling animal agriculture, environmental sustainability remains unattainable. So, getting into the theoretical foundations a bit, Metabolic Rift is seminal to the development of an overall ecological view of Marxism. Marx uses the term metabolism in capital to refer to the movement and conversion of commodities, where one commodity is exchanged for another. Social labor is metabolized, and the process ends with that result. And he also uses it to address the relationship between humans and nature and the disruption by capitalism. Marx writes, capitalist production disrupts the metabolizing that goes on between human being and the earth. The natural elements that people consume as food and clothing can no longer return to the land. Hence, capitalist production undermines the eternal natural condition of the earth's lasting fertility, thereby ruining the physical health of the urban worker and the intellectual life of the rural one. The two concepts of metabolism that we just talked about are mutual in terms of the morphing of commodities and the ongoing relationship between humans and nature/earth. And Foster first described the rift as occurring in the relationship between the two when that relationship ceases to be mutual and becomes alienated, generating ecological crises. Animal agriculture exemplifies and exacerbates this metabolic rift. Now, Marx did not include animals in the concept of alienation, yet the analysis doesn't have to stop there. As Stash notes, the concept of alienation relates to the problem that capitalism prevents humans from living up to their potentials. And as Marx says, the potentials may be to organize in a new society, perceive history, or already possess the, quote, end result of the labor process when the process begins as an idea, as something the worker imagines, end quote. That these potentials don't necessarily apply to animals isn't dispositive. just as not all humans can fulfill or even be aware of such potentials. In 2025, and with all the ethological studies informing us of similarities between ourselves and animals, and many more to be discovered, we're not barred by some strict interpretation of the word from expanding the concept to include animals. And more than that, we are also not allowing animals themselves to live up to their own potentials, whatever those may be, and however they define them to be. In Capital, Marx writes, even before he begins to work, his own labor has already been alienated from him, appropriated by the capitalist and incorporated into capital. Thus, his labor is constantly objectified during the production process in a product that belongs to someone else. The dairy industry exemplifies alienation on a very practical level, subjecting cows to relentless cycles of forced impregnation, birth, and mechanized lactation. Calves are taken away shortly after birth, causing visible distress as mother cows mourn their loss. Both the mother's reproductive labor and her child are commodified before birth, illustrating the deep exploitation inherent in that system. Now, I talked about this a little bit earlier, how veganism is a central component of anti-capitalist praxis. And I want to address that in the context of environmental justice and solidarity. Addressing the ecological impact of animal agriculture is essential in tackling climate catastrophe, and this cannot be done without veganism. Meat production is projected to reach 374 million tons by 2030, growing faster than population rate, with chicken consumption as the main driver. The food consumption aspect of veganism is a uniquely actionable and powerful tool. Dismissing this contradicts the left's stance on reducing fossil fuels and environmental justice, as dietary changes, unlike, for example, shifts in infrastructure and transportation, are immediate and arguably accessible actions individuals can take daily to reduce ecological impact. And this critique is not aimed at those with limited access, but at those who are able to make different choices and construct other dialogues. The left must move beyond dismissing or marginalizing veganism and instead engage deeply with its ethical and systemic implications. As Maurizi writes, it is only by an act of solidarity that humans can decide what happens to them and their other. In other words, it is only in praxis that the question of what the human being is can be decided. By expanding the left's vision to include animal liberation, we can more fully address our era and our existential concerns currently, and amplify resistance to capitalist commodification. Now, Angela Davis identifies food as a crucial site of struggle, echoing the disappointment I mentioned at the outset about the left's failure to critically examine the role in capitalist food systems. The left's marginalization of veganism weakens its political impact, as even Davis rarely highlights her own veganism. And that's actually a fact that's often unknown even to her admirers, and I have witnessed this personally. She emphasizes that veganism is part of a revolutionary perspective, advocating for compassionate relations beyond humans and challenging the capitalist industrial food system, which commodifies both life and perception. So including animals in our political thinking and praxis isn't sentimental or extraneous to Marxist thought. It's part of a broad approach to liberation. It's an extension and deepening of Marxian critique, which is long in the making. But let's get to some barriers and talk about that. Alongside the criticism of annoying vegans, many on the left and from a variety of other political persuasions point to so-called barriers to veganism. In particular, those barriers are broadly along cultural and economic lines. Discussions of cultural barriers to veganism often oversimplify. They referencing tribes or extreme climates or assumptions about traditional diets without addressing the role of cultural hegemony or power structures in a Gramscian sense. While all cultures use animals and plants, food practices are shaped by colonization, classism, and economic shifts, making culture a dynamic and not a static concept. Veganism, and recall the very first slide, the as far as possible and practicable qualifier doesn't demand self-sacrifice in regions where animal products are essential for survival. However, many who cite cultural barriers overlook examples like in Alaska. Actually, they use Alaska as an example very often, where plant-based diets do thrive and consumption of traditional foods is only 1% or less of total food intake, or indigenous vegans who link animal oppression to colonial exploitations, like scholar Carolyn Iena. In Africa, vegan grassroots organizations in Uganda and the Masai Mara demonstrate veganism can align with local needs, offering sustainable alternatives. While some communities rely on animal-based foods due to environmental or economic constraints, this doesn't negate veganism's relevance elsewhere. Instead, it highlights the need to address systemic issues like climate change and resource scarcity, which threaten livelihoods and ecosystems. Veganism, when it's contextualized, can be a tool for liberation and environmental resilience, not a cultural imposition. Julia Bruick cautions against using solidarity with marginalized groups as a reason to reject veganism, even if some individuals cannot be vegan to whatever circumstances. Social justice shouldn't depend on others' ability to live in certain ways. Humans adapt to their circumstances, and even where barriers exist, sharing alternative perspectives on liberation and justice can be a valuable cultural exchange. The real issue is the capitalist system profiting from animal exploitation and benefiting capital accumulation instead of society. This hegemonic cultural norm, particularly in the West, promotes the consumption of animal products, and it's disappointing when leftists marginalize veganism as an important critique of that power structure. And veganism persists even in war zones. In Gaza, vegans continue to support themselves and others amidst oppression and genocide. In Ukraine, a free vegan soup kitchen operated throughout the war until mid-2024. If Palestinians and Ukrainians can continue to manifest solidarity through veganism, at the very least, we should also take veganism seriously. Marginalizing veganism due to perceived cultural barriers reflects a failure to engage with those actively working to make that a reality. The Anthropocene, our current time, and the struggle for change demand greater imagination and openness. Now, there's another argument, the economic argument against veganism goes something like plant-based foods are more expensive, but this is increasingly untrue as the price gap narrows. And although often we're talking about pre-prepared products, but we can get into that separately. But a more significant issue is access to basic necessities, which stems from systemic problems, not veganism itself. Poverty makes all food expensive. Capitalism, through subsidies and marketing, limits access to diverse foods, creating food apartheid, where cheap, unhealthy options like McDonald's are easier to access than plant-based alternatives. Food apartheid is a cultural issue shaped by capitalism, not by veganism. Veganism should be a part of the solution to food inequality, helping push for an end to food apartheid itself. Marginalizing veganism strengthens the capitalist forces exploiting the vulnerable. Now, the case for integrating and a vision for where we are now. So, Veganism can and should be integrated into Marxist ecological critique as both an anti-capitalist response and a practical act of solidarity. Incorporating veganism into leftist frameworks has transformative potential. As Leclaire Laberge in Marx for Cats, her most recent book, suggests post-capitalism isn't imagined, but materialized through collective action. And as our imagination evolves, new relationships become possible. This vision of interspecies communism, though unknown, is fundamentally opposed to a world of factory farms, climate change, and suffering. Veganism is an indispensable part of anti-capitalist praxis, crucial for tackling the environmental crisis, labor exploitation, and the commodification of life. The left must move beyond dismissing veganism and embrace its potential to build a just, sustainable world. By integrating veganism into its political frameworks and fostering dialogue on animal liberation, environmental justice, and anti-capitalism, the left can drive systemic change. Bold action is needed, and veganism must be central to this transformative vision. Thank you so much for listening. And these are the various ways you can find me and find my work. And I look forward to continuing our discussion. And I will stop sharing my screen as soon as I can figure that out. Here we go. Find a little screen. Where is it? There we go. Let me see.
When I had to do it before, Emilia.
Yeah, I need to just get to, here we go. I just need to get
there was a little red thing.
Yep.
Which traditionally would have been appropriate to your talk. But
yes, exactly.
in America, they've switched the colors on us.
Oh, is it? Because it's still red. Okay, now I can stop sharing.
Oh, there we
Here
go.
we go. Here we go. Yeah, it just had disappeared.